Hey guys, what's going on? This is Chris back with Chris's Customs. I know I told you guys that our next video would be assembling the LT1 a little further, but still waiting on that water pump drive and some other miscellaneous parts. So that being said though, we did receive some other good parts that you guys are going to be really excited about, and I believe you guys will really like this one. Let's get into it. Let me show you guys what we finally got in the mail yesterday. Yes sir, got that new Quick Performance Fab 9, got our housing finally, our axles came in, we got our third member in that box, Willwood Brakes. Oh yeah, things are about to get interesting for old Creampuff up there. Time to get rid of the old lousy 7.5 that they factory came with. I mean, sometimes they're okay if you can, you know, put some axles or a mini spool in them and stuff like that, but otherwise they're pretty much useless. You ever put a good tire on the car and make any kind of decent power, it's going to break an axle, and the next thing it'll be breaking spider gears, then you'll put a mini spool in it, and you'll break one of those new axles, keep getting faster and faster and faster. So I figured for this car, for the money, man, from Quick Performance, you guys really can't beat it. I've been dealing with those guys now probably shoot 10 years or better, but they've always done me right. Never had an issue with them. Their shipping's always pretty accordingly. Very good people, and their customer support is awesome. That being said, getting ready to get rid of this old junky thing. You see, we actually did paint everything else forward of the car already. Everything else is done. I just kind of waited to paint anything up here until we got the rear axle out. Otherwise, everything else is pretty much done on the car besides the rear end. We got all the exhaust built all the way back to the back here. Just got to get our mufflers and all, but I was kind of waiting until we got the 9-inch situated with the 4-inch chromoly drive shaft and all that good stuff before we kept building the exhaust, because I do want to put tailpipes on this car. That's my overall goal. You know, it's just going to be a little fun. I did put a new gas tank, fuel system and all in it too, so we're going to drop that out before we pull the rear end, just because I actually did also buy a spare tire delete for this thing. So I want to cut that out and get that thing out of the way. We got all of our other parts here. Got our drive shaft cross member tube, control arms, that spare tire delete panel. I got everything pretty much to put the rear end in. We got some BMR lowering springs for the rear of the car too. So let's jump into it. Let's get started on this thing, get this drive shaft out. Good dude. And as you guys can tell, I actually had this drive shaft cut down just to put back in the car for the time being, just so we could move the car around with this rear end and all. We already knew we were getting a 9-inch. We just needed something where we could move the car around. Be a lot easier than pushing it in and out and all that good stuff. See if we can't get this thing out. Oh yeah, just like a glove. Right, let's move on to these shock bolts, guys. And just so you know, everything on this car is metric, so these shock bolts are 13mm and they have a nut on the back side. seen the rear end drop too, guys. As soon as you undo the shocks on these cars, it pretty much lets the rear end free hang. So you can support it. It's not gonna hurt anything if you don't. Before we get ready to take the bolts out itself, we will support the rear end. All right, moving on to the other side. Got some dirt dobblers all up in here. Wouldn't you know it? Right where you need to be working at. Trying to get those guys out of the way. All right. One of them. A little tighter on the driver's side than it is the passenger side. That's okay, we'll get it. And it is out. Now you guys can see that the whole rear end is pretty much dinging. All right, let's fold these shocks out of our way. Kind of spin those down to the bottom, because when we pull this rear end out, we are not using anything here. Let's move on to these lower control arms. And just so you know, all the control arm bolts on this car are 18 millimeter. Everything on this car is metric. There's nothing different. Let's see if we can get these things loose. Done exactly what we wanted it to do. Leave the bolt in there. Once we get ready to drop the rear, if you have a lift, easiest way to do this, go ahead and get all the bolts loose, everything together, and we'll sit the car down to where the tires just do touch the concrete or gravel, whatever it is that you're using. As soon as the tires touch the ground, we'll lay up under it, we'll pull the bolts, and then we'll lift the car back up. If you have a floor jack, same thing. Let the car rest down to the tires are touching the ground, and pull the bolts, and should be able to jack the chassis up on the car. The rear end will stay. And see, like I was telling you guys, let's leave the bolts in it for the time being until we let the car down. We'll let the car down till the tires just barely do touch, and we'll pull the bolts out of this thing, and once we raise the car up, the rear end will stay. All right, let's move on to these upper control arms. Not too bad, still same thing, 18 millimeter, nothing different. Let's see if we can't get these bolts out now that the car is on the ground. All right, these things are actually coming out a lot easier than I thought, guys, but always spray your bolts. Cannot express that enough. If you don't do anything else, take some PB Blaster, WD-40, whatever it is that you have at home, try to take something, some kind of lubricant, spray your bolts. They'll come out a ton easier most of the time. If not, might have to put a little heat, may even have to cut the bolts out. Just depends on your situation. There you have it. Got it out. Sometimes too, if you put a little downward motion on your socket, it'll try to grab the threads on the bolt and thread itself out. All right, let's see. Oh yeah, it's coming out. See if we can't get our handy dandy pry bar back in here. There we go. Last bolt. Might have to do the socket trick with this one too. Let's see if I can't get the socket back on here. Just about. There we go. She should be ready to come out. While we got these last bolts out, let's try to see if we can't make sure these control arms aren't going to get hung up. As you see, that one right there is loose too. Maybe we can even grab these bottom ones and see if we can't pry those down to get those out of the way. And just like so. Hey guys, now we got all 4 of our connecting points loose and out of the way. We should be ready to lift the car up and see where we go from there. See if we can't jack this thing up. The rear end should stay. Oh yeah. Uh-oh, got something hanging. What we got? Another e-brake cable. Go. Got the rear end pushed out of our way. Now you guys can kind of tell what's going on up under here. We left those 4 control arms hanging. We'll take those bolts out. Then we'll be ready to start wire brushing, painting a little bit. See if we can't get that 9-inch hung back up in here. Okay, let's try to get these lower control arm bolts out. Just want to give you guys another little trick too. I'm sure a lot of you know this trick or not, but these cars, the bolt actually has an access hole that runs through the chassis. And they're all 18 millimeter, just like the other ones were, but they have an access hole to go towards the bolt. The bolt actually comes out of the side. Well, as you all know, when you use something inside of a chassis, you have issues trying to get the bolt and or the socket back out. So a lot of times what I'll do is wrap some tape around my adapter or my socket or anything like that, just so when you get ready to pull this out, the socket doesn't end up in the chassis somewhere where you can't get to it. You know, there's probably different ways of doing it, probably some even better tools, but I'm using the tools I got. Have no problem with it. They work just as well as anybody else's. It gets the job done, but I usually put a little tape on mine. You ain't got to worry about it falling back off, so just figured I would mention that. Like I said, a lot of you probably already know those things, but there's a lot that probably don't think about it anyway, so see if we can't get these bolts out. Oh yeah. Got it. And then also, guys, it might be a little easier to take something like a screwdriver and or, you know, a pry bar, I mean, anything that you can get to fit the inside of that hole to push that bolt through. And then we'll probably need our magnet for the bolt, because I imagine it is probably going to be stuck in the chassis, but we'll see how it goes. There goes that one. Let's see. Might be able to get the bolt out. Hard to say. Probably gonna have to have a magnet. Always need a magnet. You guys definitely get a magnet anytime you can get one. They are nice to have just in case you need it. There we go. That's why you keep a magnet around. Those reasons right there. I think we're ready for a little power brush action now, guys. Get the grinder out, got the fuel tank removed, everything stripped, all the control arms out of the way. Frame on this car is in really, really good shape. Everything looks really well. Just needs a good little power brushing, throw a little paint on it so it don't look so nappy, and well, at least it'll protect it. Okay, y'all, it looks like after a little bit of paint, I'll tell you, paint will work wonders. It ain't perfect by any means, but at least we got something over top of that stuff to encapsulate it, you know what I mean? Little grinding action, yeah, that's not my favorite part by any means. It makes a daggone mess, but it looks a ton better than it did. And you're probably wondering why I left this part, you know, unpainted, in other words, but that's because we're actually going to clearance the frame rail on this car as well. See, the wheel tub on this car is actually wider than the chassis is. You can fit more of a wheel and do a little massaging on these wheel tubs. You could fit a 10-inch wheel in this car, no problem. So that being said, I actually bought the frame rail plates where we can box it in. And a lot of people will cut the frame rail and, you know, fab it up and use the outside piece that they cut and reuse it, man. But as cheap as these kits are, you're a lot better to just buy the kit. I can't remember exactly how much I gave for it, but either way, you get the idea. Once we cut it out, this piece will go back and it'll be about another, I'd say half of an inch, maybe 3/8 of an inch, something like that. We'll have that much more clearance there once we do it. So it'll help us fit our wide wheels. We've actually got the 2 rear wheels that match the front Pro Stars on this car. Like I said, they're 15 by 10s and all, but they're a little wide for the factory frame rails on this thing. It's the right back spacing and all. I think you run a 5.5 with a 10-inch wheel, or a 4.5 with an 8-inch wheel under these cars. And I could be wrong, but I'm about for sure that's what it is. So anywho, let's move on to getting our 9-inch hung in this thing. And I wanted to show you guys a little something that may or may not know, a trick here too, but here's the factory control arms that come out of the car. You know, stock hollow tube, got rubber bushings in it. You know, eventually you get to making any power with these cars. You know, everybody talks about the G-body shuffle. You get to making any power with these things, it'll actually end up ripping these bushings apart. Have a lot of slop. The car won't drive good. It just won't 60 foot track. It just start having issues. So that's why we went with these big boy Heim joint style, solid on both end control arms here. But anywho, the trick that I wanted to show you guys, you know, these are double adjustable is what they call these, to where you can actually break both jam nuts and spin the rod itself to either lengthen or shorten the control arm, either side, whatever you got to do to get the wheelbase square on the car. Keeps the rear end square, so you know the car drives right. You know, if you go down track or anywhere and the car is hooked up and it's driving right or left, you can actually adjust these bars to get it to run true like it needs to. You might have to put a half a turn of bar on one side or the other. You know what I mean? But either way, moral of the story here, the reason I'm wanting to show you guys this, a lot of people freak out because they're adjustable. They're like, oh, I don't know where to start. I don't know where to start. Honestly, if you've got a control arm that's got the bushings that aren't terrible like this one, you know what I mean? They're actually not bad at all. In other words, the eyes are still pretty much centered. They're not beat up and pushed forward or back. You know what I mean? No issues with any of that. But a good starting point for these things are to actually take your new control arms and square them up with the holes that are in your old control arms. You know what I mean? You can lengthen or shorten the rod on both sides to get it where you need it to be. But that being said, this will give you a good neutral starting point so you know that you're close. It ain't like you're going out there and guessing and all. And obviously, once you start changing the instant center of the bottom bar of the car and all, it changes the length too. But this is just a good starting point for putting it right back in the car. No issues. Obviously, when you do this, you know, with this bolt here, these are actually the spacers that take up the distance in between your torque boxes and or your locators under the car. In other words, you see that this control arm's only that thin versus how thick these are. So these locators actually go on the inside of this thing to take up, for one, the distance of it, but also they get it to where the bolt fits tight inside the hole. So in other words, when you go to start doing this and checking to get a neutral position on this, make sure you use your registers when you do this. Obviously, when you put this bolt in here, yeah, it goes down in the bottom of that hole, but you still got all this motion and you know what I mean, everything else. So if you'll put these registers down on both sides, you know what I'm saying? Go ahead and put it on either side. Go ahead and get it all lined up. Excuse me, I'm trying to do this with one hand too, so bear with me. Either way, if you'll take these things and go ahead and slide them in like that there, you can actually take and put them under the bottom side of it, and it will take up your distance like we're talking about. Hold on just a second, guys. Like so. Drop your top register in, both sides. Then you can take your bolts, drop down through here, and make sure they line up with these holes. What you're going for this neutral position is to be able to make sure that you can move this rod a little bit side to side and all, and the bolts pull out easy on both sides. You know what I mean? They fall right in the hole, no problem. So you know that you're at least starting neutral in the factory location where it was at before. So, like I said, a lot of you might know that too, but a lot of you might not. You know, a lot of people freak out when they get double adjustable control arms, excuse me. They don't know really a good base starting point. And it's honestly, it's simple. And even if your bushings are beat out or whatever the case may be, still you can take a tape measure and get as close to center of this big hole as you can and pull a measuring or pull a measurement with it, and do the same on your new control arm and just adjust it on both ends. You know, try to keep it equal on both ends versus just one side out or, you know, the other. That way you keep the same amount of thread inside the body. So I just wanted to tell you guys that before we get ready to start hanging this thing in here, because obviously, you know, there ain't but 4 bolts on each side. So either way, y'all just bear with me and we'll go ahead and get this thing slapped in here. All right, y'all. We got our trick chassis control arms all bolted in, ready to go, so we can go ahead and set the 9-inch in here. Man, those things are beautiful. Like I said, trick chassis make some good components. That's where the control arms came from. the 2 frame rail pieces. I've also got a drive shaft safety loop too, which also acts as a brace for the lower control arm mounts. Stiffens everything up, so you ain't got to worry about any flexing or any of that stuff either. But one other thing I was going to mention before we do go ahead and throw this thing in here is, so this kit comes with hardware, comes with the spacers, the bolts, everything, you know what I'm saying? Got all the hardware that comes with it. But always check your rear end housing for your lower control arm brackets and or your top spherical bushings to see what size holes are in them. You see, this is the hardware they sent, and it's just floppy as can be. Same thing as in the top. You got plenty of extra clearance there. So anytime you have that, always put the largest hardware you can put in those things. That's the last thing you want, is any kind of clearance or slop or anything like that. You want to make sure that everything's good and tight. So what I did, obviously these bolts before were the ones that went into these spacers. I went on and drilled our spacers out to accommodate the size bolt that we need. Therefore, I already found some hardware. We just got to get a little shorter hardware for it, but I got some nice grade 8 hardware, and you see these things fit a lot tighter. I mean, you basically got to push to get them in there. I mean, it'll go through there too, but you know what I mean. Everything will fit good now, though. But like I said, you definitely want to put some good hardware in it anyway. Grade 8's good for sure, but now we know that we have the right size to fit our housing. Like I said, I haven't mic'd to see exactly what size bolt this is. I'm not sure. I want to say it's probably a 1/2 inch bolt. Either way, went on and drilled out the upper control arms as well, so they will work with this hardware as well. Either way, like I said, you just definitely want to make sure you can put the biggest hardware you can put in it. The last thing you want when you go to jerking on this thing with all these heim joints and everything else all solid, you don't want any slop in anything. That'll start having all kinds of issues, start wallowing the holes out, everything else when you go to beating on it. So just wanted to go ahead and tell you guys about that. Can't express that part enough, but yeah, let's go ahead and throw this thing up in here. Got our 9-inch hung up in there. Like I said, it wasn't, but literally 4 bolts on each side, so it's the only reason I didn't record that. And the housing is dry. That's the reason I always like to do that. It's a hell of a lot lighter than it is with everything in it. There ain't no third member, no axles, no nothing like that. Like I said, we'll build it in the car from here. It's in there though. I'll tell you, man, it looks a lot better up under here for sure. But all the control arms, everything fit perfect. Like I said, you can tell that we started off in a neutral position just because, I mean, obviously the rear end's not jacked way up right now or nothing, but you can see that the face of the third member spot on the housing is pretty much symmetrical. I mean, it's straight up and down, in other words, right now. So you can tell that we're pretty close where the factory arms would have been. There's definitely going to be some adjustments, the pinion angle, everything else, the side to side with the upper control arms. That's actually how you move on a triangulated 4-link like this. The way you actually move or shift the housing, as I should say, from side to side, you put some bar in this side and or that side that actually moves the rear end left to right to get your wheel wells centered, to get your tires the same amount where there's none sticking out of one side or the other. But you see the BMR lowering springs, man, they fit good too. Everything so far has fit just like a glove. As usual though, you use good parts, you don't have any issues. So let's keep on moving forward, guys. Like I said, it looks a ton better for sure. But we'll get us some hardware tomorrow, and what we'll do is just pull these bolts out one at a time, throw the other one in it, and then we'll be able to actually tighten those up fully, not have any issues with any of that. All right, we got our third member sitting up here, guys. We'll go ahead and run a thin layer of silicone all the way around it. You know, a lot of people have preference for gaskets or this and that. I mean, if I do use a paper gasket, I try to still put just a hair of sealer on both sides. I've always been a big fan of just gray silicone. That's just my thing. You guys do it the way you want to. I've had good success with that. Not many leaks at all, but if it does have a leak, it's just from something spontaneous, I guess you would say. But we're gonna go ahead and run a thin layer of sealer around this thing. You ain't got to get too crazy with it. I do try to go around the bolt holes on these things though. Nothing too extravagant, but you get the idea. Try to get this thing ready where we can throw it up in there. trying to get this stuff to come out of the tube. I feel like my hand's shaking like crazy because I gotta squeeze it so hard. Oh yeah. Like I said, it doesn't have to be too thick. Just a fine layer, nothing too crazy. Get a little more on it in that spot. Not really a left-handed kind of person, but we'll make do. Yeah, that should be just fine. It'll be just fine, guys. All right, let me get this camera set up over here and we'll throw this thing in. Let's get this third member up in here. Boy, you gotta love a 9-inch. There we go. That's her. Boy, those things are heavy, guys. You grab our nuts real quick. We'll try to cinch this thing down. All right. Get all these nuts started. We'll be good to go. By the way, guys, I know I didn't tell you a lot about the center section here, but it is a Yukon modular iron case. It's nothing crazy. No aluminum or billet steel or nothing crazy like that. Be plenty for what we're doing, but it does have a billet center support or bearing support on it, which is actually really nice, man. Quick Performance, I'm telling you, they make some really nice stuff. Those guys know what they're doing. And this thing does have 411s. It is a 411 gear is what we went with. Like I said, it's definitely make this thing really rowdy, but it also has overdrive, so it'll still cruise good. And it's 35 spline axles as well. But yeah, thing should be solid. Definitely won't have to worry about breaking it with this thing. It don't make enough power for it, but I always do like to overachieve, I guess you would say. I like to go overkill with everything, just because we know we won't have to worry about breaking it, or whatever we put in front of this thing, it'll be fine. Like I said, let's just run these things up. Kind of go in a crisscross fashion, but we don't have to worry about messing anything up. I'll have to get a wrench for this bottom one. I'll probably have to finish snugging it up with a wrench anyway. Like it pushed out nicely everywhere. Should be pretty good. We'll get us a wrench for that bottom one and we'll be stout. Get these things good and snug with this wrench first. Not a big fan on these fine thread bolts that come with these things. Putting a lot of crazy torque with an impact or something on it. I always try to go back and snug them up by hand. At least we don't have to worry about breaking something. Come on now. Oh yeah. We're in good shape, guys. Thing looks good. Okay, guys. There it is right there. Got the third member in it. You can see that sealer just barely peeking out the edge of that thing, man. I'm glad to see it. Always means you got a good little bead going all the way around. It should seal up very nicely. No issues. Everything looks good on this side. Yep, this side as well. All the way up to the top. We'll be good to go. And it does already have a 1350 billet yoke on it too as well. So it's already set up for the big universal joint. So I think that's about it for today, guys. I think we're going to call it a day and come back in the morning. So we'll see you guys then. All right, we're back here again this morning, guys. We see we got our new hardware already installed. Went on and stuck those bolts in it this morning and tightened everything up. Everything done perfect, exactly what we needed. They were 1/2-inch bolts, by the way. Everything fits good and tight. Got no issues now. Everything should be good to go on that end. But let's move forward. What we're going to do next here. Go ahead and you see the housing's dry. Obviously, we did get our third member in last night. Got all that done before we left the shop. But now we got our new seals we have to put in. If you look, these are the big 9-inch ends on this thing. They have different seal variations for different size housings and different ends and stuff like that. But see, not this step. This is actually where your bearing rides right here. And then the bearing, I guess you would say the inner race section kind of slides forward a little bit. But this next step right here is where these seals actually go. So we need to get those in there. But obviously there's 100 different ways to put seals in, guys. I've seen people use, chisels, punches, whatever it is. I mean, yeah, you can do it that way, no problem. It works. If it works, it'll work, But what I actually like to do here, I've actually got a set that nothing crazy, fancy or nothing, just one of those Harbor Freight specials. It's actually a seal and race driver. I usually flip mine around this side. Obviously, the other side's for installing bearing races and stuff like that. But that being said, I flip mine around to this way. That way you can kind of use the whole flat surface of the seal. So if you look right here, I'll show you guys with the seal. I've already got the right installer that I want to put on the end of this thing. It literally fits the seal pretty much perfect. So it'll make sure that you use the whole surface area of the seal while you're putting it in there. You also see it doesn't get stuck in the housing or nothing. It goes all the way back to where that recess is that we were seeing before. It goes all the way in past that, so it's not going to get hung on anything or anything of that sort. So let's go ahead and get these seals drove in here. I like to also put just a hair sealer on the outside of my seal surfaces. You don't have to. That's just kind of personal preference. But let's go ahead and get those seals in there, and we'll go ahead and slide the axles in this thing. All right, we got our seal sitting in there. Got a little sealer all the way around it. Let's see if we can't get this installer in here. We'll go ahead and get this thing put all the way in. Let me grab my hammer. All right. Kind of center it up the best you can. I think it's flush. Maybe we need a little more at the top, possibly. Oh yeah, it changed tones now and no way all the way in there. Oh yeah. I think that'll do it, guys. still looks like it could be a hair at the top though. Let's just make sure. Oh yeah. Kind of just take your finger and make sure it feels about the same all the way around. I think we should be pretty straight. Like I said, you gotta be able to see it. Like I said, put a little sealer on it. Just make sure everything seals up good and nice. Good and tight, no issues. Let's move on to the other side. Make sure everything's in good. Got our seals all in, both sides. Got a little grease in there just so it doesn't have any dry surfaces when we put the axle in. So we got our flange studs already in, both sides, ready to go. That way once we put our Willwood backing plates on with our emergency brake shoe kit, everything will be ready to slide on. We'll slide the axles in. But one thing I wanted to mention, guys, I don't know if you know a lot about 9-inch stuff, but don't let it freak you out. A lot of people go crazy as soon as they open their axles for their kit for a 9-inch. There's definitely a difference. There is one long side, one short side. Your long side is predetermined to go on the side furthest away from the ring gear. So if you see on the back of this housing, your ring gear rides about right here. So you got all this extra space on this side. Therefore, your unit and or spool has a long side that is splined deeper in. That being said, your long axle will be on the passenger side. Your short axle will be on the driver's side. So just wanted to go ahead and mention that before we jump into things, but let's go ahead and get it put together. First things first, guys, let's go ahead and get our rear shoe assembly for our emergency brakes on there. Make sure that the side orientation is right. Your calipers will be on the back. Your e-brake cable entry will be on the front, top. You know, everything else is pretty self-explanatory. And being we're on the driver's side, we are going to use our short axle. So your shortest axle on this side, go ahead, get it ready to go in here. Already got a little grease on it as well where the seal surface is. I'm also going to put a little sealer on the edge of this bearing. You don't have to. Again, personal preference. You guys leave a comment. Let me know how you guys like to put your axles in your housing, but it's just kind of personal preference. But in other words, I like to just put just a little bit of sealer on the surface, the OD of the bearing right here. Just a little bit all the way around the edge of it. Nothing crazy. Wipe all this extra off. Come around to this side. Like I said, just something to make sure if the seal doesn't catch everything, it's not just pouring out of the axle tube. Like I said, kind of personal preference. It's just the way I do it. Let's go ahead and get this thing slid in here. Try to be real easy. Kind of keep all the pressure off of the seal as you can, just so you're not dragging everything across it. Just try to keep it kind of centered. Pull the weight up with the end of the axle flange. You see it starting into the unit there, and it's right there in the edge. So now, moving forward, before we get ready to slap this axle all the way in and or tap it in here, let's go ahead and get our bearing support plate that holds or retains the bearing. Should say bearing retainer, but let's go ahead and get it in there in its right position. It's a little aggravating. If you got the axle already slid in, probably should have slid it in first, but either way, you get the idea. It's all in there. Let's get us a board. There's probably, again, different ways to do this, but let's just get a rag or something here, paper towel, something on the end of this board here. Kind of slide it between the studs here and just give this thing a couple gentle taps. Should go right in. Let's say it changed tone. I'm going to say it's in there. Should be able to make sure we got all this squared up. Got that retainer plate in there all the way. The good thing is, guys, this axle does have a hole in the end of it. if you spin this, you can actually get right to the plate where you can touch it to get it in there. This is actually for when you tighten the bolts anyway, but just a little easier to make sure everything's centered up before we keep moving with that. Let's get to it on this side, y'all. I kind of quit filming there for just a second. It was aggravating as crap trying to get those nuts and all started. Obviously, you guys don't want to see me bicker back and forth and probably make all kinds of fun words up while I was trying to get those nuts on. But moving on to this passenger side, already got our sealer on our axle. I got our flange sitting up there, and I've got our backing plate on with our emergency brake shoes. So go ahead and we'll slide this axle in on this side. And I will note one thing, guys, that I didn't explain on the other side, which is a very valid point that everybody should know about. There we go. Okay. This bearing retainer here, if you look at it, you see how it's got a notch sticking out. A lot of your 9-inch plates are actually, they don't have that little recessed position there or that notch sticking out like that. A lot of them are just flat on both sides. You know, you put it on there. Usually the bearing itself sits flush with the end of the axle tube itself. So that plate just, you know, keeps the bearing pressed in all the time. You don't have to worry about, you know, it coming back out or having any movement or anything like that. But these are actually the Willwood brake kits axle bearing retainers. That being said, the reason they have this recess on it, see, this thing will actually go on the bolts either way. It doesn't matter. But I meant to mention that earlier. I actually had it this way when I put it on, and I didn't show you guys, but I actually ended up taking it back off, flipping it the right way. I don't know why I didn't pay attention or whatever, but this backing plate on this thing is actually a little thicker than what your normal backing plate would be if you're running drum brakes or something like that. Usually they're thin. That being said, I ended up having to flip this to where this notch was in, so it actually sits against the bearing face on the axle. With it this way, where it's flat against it when you put it on, there's actually a gap about that far between the bearing and the back of the plate. Therefore, the axle could actually shift in and out a little bit back and forth. Probably could cause some damage on the splines, everything else. So just wanted to note that before we get ready to keep moving forward, that this does on the Willwood kit go in. The notch faces the axle tube. The flat faces out. Just to ensure that it goes all the way in and it keeps pressure on the axle. I just wanted you guys to know that. I did end up, like I said, switching it back the correct way off camera. So now that we know that. Also, Willwood states 12 o'clock position with your opening. A lot of them show it to be this way, but per Willwood, this is the way they want it to be. So that being said, I'll try to go ahead and we'll get this bearing retainer slid in here before we drive the axle in. It's a little easier right now than it would be the other way. So let's see if we can't. Might actually have to tap the axle in a little bit to get it to where we can get this plate to set on those bolts. It was actually hitting the bearing surface before it was the threads. So let's see if we can't maneuver this thing up on there. Well, we got our backing plates in with our emergency brake shoes. Got the axles in. I went on and tightened all the nuts up on this side, guys. Same thing as the other side. They are aggravating, but just bear with yourself. Like I said, as long as you spin that axle around where that hole's at, you can align it with the nut. Might have to use a magnet to put the washer on, but either way, you can get it. You can get it. It'll all fall together once you get them all started because it's got T-bolts. So on the back side, they're actually, let's see, the easiest way to get in here. The backside actually has T-bolts right there. Therefore, those bolts can't turn against the axle housing. So once you get them started, they can't just spin around. You don't have to have a wrench on the backside or anything like that. They'll, pretty self-explanatory, no big deal. But once you get those snugged up and get all that going, we can finally slide our rotors on. So we got our rotors here from Willwood, and they're really nice pieces. They're Unilog. I guess they fit different applications. I'm gonna say small GMs, 5 on 475. Imagine it fits forward to 5 on 4.5, and maybe big Chevy 515, I'm not sure, but yeah, they're really nice. Drilled slotted rotors, everything's good. Another thing I wanted to talk about, if you see the center of this hole, a lot of times when you get Willwood brakes, they come with these eccentric spacers, or rings, as you should say, just in case. Depends on the OD of your axle. In other words, if it fits sloppy, or if it has any movement, or you have any space there, a lot of times they send you eccentric rings that'll actually fit over the axle good and snug like that, and then it'll center up the rotor itself. If your wheel studs are smaller or whatever, I opted actually when I bought these axles to go to the Ford half-inch studs where they're a little bigger. I didn't really want to go crazy big like 5/8 and use spacers and all, and then I'd have to mill my wheels and all that good stuff. But I went half-inch Ford axles and all, so, or Ford axle studs, as I should say. But you actually see they actually do fit the rotor pretty snug. They fit the rotor pretty snug anyway, but like I said, you can see some of that open space around the axle either way, so you can still wiggle this rotor just a little bit. Therefore, definitely need to use our eccentric rings just so we know that the axle is, centered where it needs to be, or the rotor hat itself. You don't have to worry about any vibrations or anything. That's really what it's for, just to keep the harmonics down and all the issues with vibrations and everything, just because, it keeps it dead center. See, like, that's a lot better fit there. It actually takes up all of the space that was there with that centric ring. So, we got our rotors on now, and we'll go ahead and slap these calipers on here, and I'm going to say we're probably going to call it a done deal. Let's go ahead and get these calipers installed, guys. We got our Willwood calipers out of the box. They're 4-piston, 2 on each side. And notice on these things too, they actually do have 4 bleeder screws. They have one on each cavity on each corner. Because see, these are really the same part number. You could put this on this side and still have bleed screws at the top, have, bleed screws at the bottom, whatever. But one thing to note is whatever size you do use it on, driver or passenger, whatever bleed fittings are at the top are the only ones that you're going to use when you start bleeding brakes. Anytime that you open a bleeder that's on the bottom of a caliper, you risk the chance of sucking air back into the system, and it just makes it a harder job to bleed everything. Like I said, always use your fittings or bleeder screws that are always the furthest point at the top, just because you all the air always gets trapped at the top. Think about it, it's just like a bubble in a water bottle. If you flip it upside down, the bubble tracks whichever way the top point of the water is, where the gas can escape or air. So same situation on these rotors or calipers, same thing. Like I said, always use your ones that are at the very top. It'll make the job a lot easier. Not have to worry as much about what you got going on. If you have problems bleeding or whatever the case may be, just makes everything a lot easier. Let's see what we got going on here. There it is. Like I said, we're actually just going to snug these up by hand for the time being until we center this rotor, because actually before we get ready to put pads or anything on here, you always run one lug nut to the face, or just something, a nut, the lug nut itself, something like that, all the way up against the rotor hat itself, so the rotor is definitely dead flush as far as it'll go on the axle itself. And we'll actually come in here and measure to make sure that our rotor is running dead center on this caliper. So when you get aftermarket rotors and stuff like that, and aftermarket calipers, everything goes together. It actually comes with shims to where you can move the caliper itself either, one way or the other. You can shim it however you have to make sure that the rotor is running dead center, just so you're not using more force on one pad side or one side of the rotor than the other. Make sure everything's just running dead true. Makes, obviously, pad wear a lot easier, a lot better on pad wear. You don't have to worry about messing stuff up, whatever the case may be. But man, it looks good. And those 4 pistons will definitely get us stopping good for sure too. Well, guys, that's pretty much going to wrap up the 9-inch install, at least the mechanical part of things anyway. We're just waiting on our drive shaft now. Got it on order, and it's on the way. Our rear shocks also are on the way. I ordered a set of just regular old competition engineering shocks for the rear of this thing. I wanted to kind of keep it coil spring so it would still ride good. And I'm not saying coilovers don't ride good, but they're definitely stiffer, or trying to find the right spring and all to get it where it rides like these factory springs do, or coil spring style. It's actually really big difference to me anyway. I like it like this, but like I said, each his own, different preferences, different people, no problems. But as soon as we get our brake lines on and get our drive shaft and get our rear shocks on, the rear end part of things will be done. But like I said, I think this video is getting a little long as it is right now. So either way, we're gonna have to split it up in 2 parts, just because, like I said, we're waiting on our drive shaft and other little stuff. And also, I think on our second video, we're going to go ahead and notch the chassis on this thing too and go ahead and plate it back. Yeah, it would have been better with the rear end out, but either way, we've got some big fire blankets and stuff we'll throw over the axle. It won't hurt any of our paint or anything, and we'll go ahead and get that cut out, replate it in, and our drive shaft safety loop and brace kit for our lower control arms, and get all that on there, and we'll be ready to take this thing up the highway and see what it does. So send it off here, y'all. Like, subscribe. Please drop a comment. Let me know what you guys think. If there's anything we could have done better or worse or whatever for that matter. How you guys would have done it, you know, tips, tricks. Either way, we can share knowledge together. I'd be all about that. So I really appreciate it, y'all. And like I said, like, subscribe. Let's grow the channel up. And yeah, drop a comment. Let me know what you guys want to see.